Ball Lightning Archmage Ascendant is easily one of the strongest builds of the last couple of leagues, especially at the amount of gear that you need to make it happen. You can clear the entirety of the game with just a 5-link Pledge of Hands and some random other rares. Now there are some items that do make this build significantly better, and what you're seeing here is my version of the character that I made a few leagues ago. This is a tier 16 super buffed map that has a ton of mods on it, and you can see we are just absolutely breezing through it with no problems. This is the standard gameplay of this build once you get it going. This build is insanely tanky, has tons of regen. The actual life pool is a little bit misleading because you're only seeing like 4,500 here, but you have to remember that we do have Mind Over Matter as well as some extra Mind Over Matter that's getting us closer to a 6 or 7k health pool. We also do have a ton of regeneration, infinite mana thanks to the Foreboding Mana Flask, and all around some of the best damage that I have seen in quite some time on this budget. With a simple gem swap, you can get a ridiculous amount of single target damage as well, upwards of 15 million. But that's not what we're here for. That's all the stuff that you can accomplish in this build at the very end game. However, we are here to figure out, is this build going to be good for league starting? Now this build did get some basic nerfs back in 3.12 when it came out. Ball Lightning got some nerfs to its AoE, so that kind of capped the damage that you can get before the Pledge of Hands, and I thought, well, this may not be a great league start. However, I was kind of proven wrong. Now originally when I had you level this character, you would start out with Stormblast Mine and then you would transition into a Spell Slinger. However, with some updates that I'm going to be making to the guide, you'll see that leveling with Stormblast Mine is actually better all the way until 38 when you're able to swap directly over to Ball Lightning. Now the main reason for me deciding that Stormblast Mine is better to keep early on is because we're now going to be using a vendor recipe that gets you a wand with added damage to spells. This added damage to spells scales insanely well with Stormblast Mine, and it allows us to carry all the way up to the point where we can swap over to the full version of the build. Now this recipe is either a blue or a yellow resist ring of any kind, as well as a blue wand, also an alteration orb. Now the type of resist ring that you use will determine the type of added damage that the wand has. I personally suggest that you go with lightning damage, as we are going to mainly be scaling lightning damage with the passive tree. However, you can use whatever resist rings you get a hold of. Now the other thing you need to take into account while leveling this build is that it does need chance orbs to purchase Ball Lightning later on. We're going to have to get Ball Lightning from Siosa in the library because the Scion doesn't get any of the useful abilities for this build, so we're going to be sticking with Stormblast Mine until you're able to obtain Ball Lightning, as well as Archmage, and as well as Unleash, which is all at around level 38. Once you do swap over, you might notice a slight drop in damage, but continue going and it will get better as you begin to scale your mana. Also, do remember that when you swap over to the other version of the build, it is insanely tanky. However, you shouldn't be reserving your mana anymore, and you should be grabbing the Agnostic Keystone and keeping on top of your mana through Arcane Cloak as well as the Dynamo Node. All of this together should give you an extremely smooth leveling process. Hey guys, Big Ducks here, and welcome back to the channel. Remember gamers, if you enjoy my content, make sure that you like this video. Also, over 75% of you still aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel. I've been telling you for quite some time now, but if you want to make sure that these videos show up in your feed, you gotta subscribe to the YouTube channel. YouTube does some weird stuff with the algorithm, so if you don't want to miss anything out, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And now, let's get back to the guide. Alright boys, so this is our character that we actually tested the league starting of, that we used to figure out if it's still okay to league start this character, and the verdict is sort of. I'm going to say that this character is a little bit more difficult than most of the other league starters that I'm going to be testing, just because it did get some pretty decent nerfs in 3.12 to the actual leveling of it, which is kind of unfortunate because they nerfed Spell Slinger, which is something that we use, and they also nerfed Ball Lightning itself, which is something that we use. It doesn't affect the endgame version of the build almost at all, however. So when I leveled this character, we actually leveled his Stormblast Mine until 38. I talked about that a little bit ago in the video, and it did work significantly better. Now we are using the full Ball Lightning version of the character with a Tabula as well as just a random staff with mana. Now, I was a little bit worried because I didn't know how this build would do, however, it did actually perform quite well with just some very basic gear. As long as you get a decent staff with some mana, you stack enough mana, you buy a Tabula or a random corrupted 6-link, just something with the correct colors, it doesn't matter what it is, and you can swap back and forth between GMP and slower projectiles for bosses, you should be more than fine. I don't even have good gear here. Most of my gear is pretty trash. We could always grab the Wrath Ring, we could always grab a whole bunch of stuff, and all of that will be in the path of building, and I'll be talking about the leveling and all of that, but I kind of want to show you guys what happens when you get to maps and you're just doing some basic low tier stuff. The video from earlier showed you some tier 16 super high investment maps. I just want to kind of show you some very, very basic gameplay of around when you hit maps. So this is just going to be a tier 2 map, very simple. This is with a bunch of gear that I just found on the ground while I was leveling. The only things that I have bought were this staff, which I bought for 2 chaos, and then the tabula, which was around 9. These are the only 2 items that I bought. We were doing okay until then, but you can kind of see that the damage is still perfectly fine. Now, this is with slower projectiles, so let's swap over to GMP. Now, GMP is going to be a little bit better for clearing. You do want to use slower projectiles for bosses, but you can see we're clearing pretty easily. It's not too bad. Big enemies aren't going to die as quickly, but we do have things for them. We can always use our Sigil of Power, which is something I've added to the build, as well as our Curse. Man, that's a big boy. But you can see the gameplay is still about the same as what you saw earlier. It's just when you don't have the Pledge of Hands, you do see a pretty big drop in damage. Now, what I want to say is that there's a lot of reasons why people would be worried about this build, but I think the gear is not going to be one of them. As long as you do push forward into maps, you can get the Pledge of Hands pretty early on in the league. You don't need a 6-link version of it. All that you need to get is any Pledge of Hands whatsoever. You can always buy the Divination card, you can always just look out for one early on, and as soon as you're able to afford it, you can use either the 5-link Prophecy or just 5-link it yourself. A 5-link Pledge of Hands is enough to get through the entirety of the game. Now, here on the Flashback League, I don't actually have access to Pledge of Hands. There's literally only 3 in all of existence because this league is so dead that no one is playing it whatsoever. So I wasn't able to actually buy the Pledge. I would have, and I would have just tried to 5-link it or even 4-link it, and it would have been substantially better than the 6-link Tabula. Because the way that this build works is that the greater spell echo is huge. It gives you a ton of area and a ton of cast speed, a ton of everything. So when you get each of those repeats, it's going to give you a ton of damage. Very important for the build. However, it still is perfectly fine, even with just clearing. I mean, you could probably get up to yellow maps pretty comfortably without worrying too much. Just leveling, making sure that you keep up on your mana. I've only got 4K right now. You could easily have a couple thousand more than that. So just keep on top of your gear. I talk about most of that in the Path of Building. But let's head back to town now that you've seen this. So I do want to talk a little bit about the tree. The tree is going to be updated with the pathing that I take a little bit. What I noticed early on is that it really is starved for damage points, and there's not a lot that we can do about that because we can either respec a whole bunch or we can just go ahead and try it. Now, early on, I went to grab Elemental Overload. However, Elemental Overload isn't actually great early on if you're going to be using Stormblast Mine, so we're going to be avoiding this very early on. You'll grab it right after you swap over to actual Ball Lightning. We're going to be grabbing these damage nodes here. This is going to give us some Elemental Resist, some damage, some chance to free Shock and Ignite. It's pretty good early on because we're really going to be suffering for damage early on. We're going to run up here, we're going to grab some of this lightning damage now, and the other thing to talk about is how we're doing our Ascendancy. Now, as we all know with the Scion, the first Ascendancy is useless. It's literally a skill point and some stats. We're going to be going Path of the Ranger first because we do need these flask nodes very early on, and we'll grab the Inquisitor last with Uberlab. So make sure that you check in the Path of Building to see all the updates that I did to the leveling tree. It isn't a full rework, but I have modernized a lot of this stuff, so it should work quite a bit better for you. I didn't have too bad of a time. Now that I have learned that if you put Mine Detonate on left click, it really doesn't feel too bad. It's not bad at all, so go take a look at the Path of Building. Got all the information that you need. Alright boys, and that's pretty much all you need to know. This build is still pretty good for people that have a little bit better grasp on the game. I wouldn't recommend a very new player to choose this build. However, if you are somewhat familiar with this build already, it's probably an excellent choice. Now remember, if you have further questions or I didn't answer anything in this video about the build or something else, make sure that you join my Discord. It's linked down below. That is the best way to get any kind of help that you need with any of my builds and also hang out with me and the boys. Now, I also do want to tell you that I am going to be live streaming on Twitch. We're going to be doing a ton of League Start testing. The next build that we're going to be messing around with is going to be the Impale Lancing Steel Champion. Now, that Lancing Steel Champion levels with all of the steel skills, so we're going to be testing that out. Make sure that you follow me over on twitch.tv/bigducks so that you can see when I go live. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure that you like this video so more people can see it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if for some reason you haven't at this point, and stay safe out there in Ray Class. And I'll see you guys in the next video.